The UK government has an ambitious digital trade agenda. It aims to be a global leader in digital through its next generation trade deals. It wants to be the world's most attractive data marketplace. And it has a 10-year plan to make the UK a global AI superpower. So what exactly is in these trade agreements? Well, as you know, our economies are increasingly digital. As consumers, we increasingly shop online, we pay for coffee with our smartphones, we use video streaming services, we buy smart devices for our homes. In the business sector, we see many firms, including accountancy and financial firms, providing their services virtually, while manufacturing and retail firms use data and digital technologies to optimize their supply chains. And the national and global rules for how we govern this emerging digital economy are only now being written. At the international level, governments have really looked to trade agreements. We see negotiations on digital at the World Trade Organization, as well as digital trade chapters in our free trade agreements. Last year, we saw the world's first standalone digital economy agreement between Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile. In the UK, we've seen digital trade provisions in the Japan Agreement. We'll see them soon in our agreements with New Zealand and Australia, and we expect them in future, including in our agreement with Singapore, which negotiations have just begun. So what exactly is in the trade agreements when it comes to digital? Well, the list is growing fast. Some of the most common provisions are on trade facilitation, including provisions to ensure that customs and other trade-related paperwork is all digital to save companies having to fill out paper copies. There are also provisions that ensure that electronic contracts and e-signatures are legally recognised, again to save all that paperwork. An increasing number of agreements have provisions on cross-border data flows, which, as you know, is a pretty contentious issue. Data flows underpin the digital economy, and the volume of data crisscrossing our borders every day is growing exponentially. So trade agreements seek to remove barriers and facilitate trade flows, while also upholding other policy objectives. As you know, there are real concerns around data flows, whether that's citizens worrying about how their personal data will be treated in other jurisdictions, financial regulators wanting to ensure that they've got easy access to data on financial transactions, and governments in many developing countries are trying to figure out how to regulate those data flows to ensure that their firms and citizens are able to derive economic gains from the data-driven economy. So there are quite serious debates about how to craft provisions that strike appropriate balances between enabling data to flow while also upholding these different regulatory objectives. Trade agreements also include provisions on new digital technologies, including algorithms. And there's a very live debate about how to ensure that provisions both protect the intellectual property of innovating companies, for example, to make sure that they aren't unfairly asked to divulge their algorithms and their source codes, while at the same time making sure that governments can have access to those algorithms and source codes if it's for regulatory purposes, and to make sure that they're being used transparently and fairly. We're now seeing provisions that aim to protect consumers online, on platform liability, net neutrality, the promotion of competition in digital markets, and cybersecurity. That list is really growing. It's an exciting and important area of trade policy. Understanding the trade-offs and striking an appropriate balance between different policy objectives really isn't straightforward, and there are many unknowns. Digital technologies are evolving rapidly, and regulators are running to catch up. There are strong grounds for arguing that some of the previous trade agreements largely reflect the interests of global technology companies. I remember when the USMCA was signed, the Financial Times reported that the digital trade provisions were widely seen to have, in effect, handed over the keys to those who harvest and therefore benefit from data the most, i.e. the big American technology groups. As the UK looks to be a pioneer in this space, it's really important that our policy on digital trade is evidence-based, that it's developed in collaboration with other government departments and agencies, and that the trade-offs are carefully identified and discussed. We need wide consultation and effective consultation with business, but also with civil society and other groups, as well as really robust parliamentary scrutiny.